Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kellen Badeham with the NWBA. Welcome to digital demo number 33. We are really lucky today. We get to visit James Binnion's shop up in Washington. He is going to be sharing with us some tips and tricks on Mokume, as well as giving us the kind of first preview of a new Mokume furnace he has created that will soon be available potentially to purchase plans or kits for. Not quite today, but it's a cool little furnace. I got to see it before. I'm looking forward to him sharing it with us. James, I'm going to spotlight your camera.
All right.
And Good morning, you're on.
Morning. So I thought I'd start with, see if I can manage this technology here. And all right, so this is the kiln that I wanted to share with you all today. It's just a simple little fire break kiln using a propane and air burner that I built kind of starting from some basic designs that you find in books and YouTube and whatever. But the whole idea behind this kiln is very different than a normal blacksmith's forge. Normal blacksmith's forge, you're trying to get stuff hot as fast as you possibly can. So you're running the burner full out, and your whole idea is to get that work hot so that you can get it under the hammer and get the metal moved. What I'm really wanting to do here is to get the work heated up to a specific temperature and then hold it at that temperature and keep as much oxygen away from the work as I can during the process. So I designed this kiln to run the torch at a very, very low output. And the other kind of interesting or different thing about it is it's got a turntable inside of it so that you can see the port there where the burner comes in. The work is able to rotate and keep it from getting overheated in just one spot. So during the heating process, I'm going to be spinning the work, and I'm going to be trying to keep it at a single temperature and keep the oxygen out of it. So if you give me just a moment here, I'm going to light this thing so that we can get it up to temperature and can talk some more about other aspects of it.
So the fuel source you got coming in on the side there, what's your burner look like? It kind of looks like a torch.
Yeah, well, it's almost like a torch. So I've actually got two sources of fuel going right now. I've got this very yellow flame that I'm adjusting right now. And that's just straight propane being dumped into the furnace. And then you can see the flames from the main burner coming in as well.
Okay.
So the main burner is providing the heat, and the straight propane is keeping it at a strongly reducing atmosphere inside the furnace. And I'm using fire brick to leave just a tiny opening there at the top. And then I got a peephole going here, and we'll be looking inside of the peephole a little further on down the road. I've got a setup to allow us to actually look into the kiln through the camera. So the other thing this kiln has got is it's got a thermocouple that's sitting in this front left-hand corner. And it allows me to keep an eye on what the temperature is. A lot of the metals I work with are very sensitive to the temperature of the materials. It's really easy to melt silver and copper alloys without intending to. And the other thing I'll just quickly show you here is this is the billet going to be firing. This is copper and brass, and basically it's the same copper, bronze, and brass. It's the same layout as the one that's up for auction. And then here on the underside of the kiln is the handle to spin the turntable inside of the kiln. When I did the hammer talk the other day, I had a couple of people asking about how things were cleaned for the process. So to clean all the sheets for lamination, I use 220 or 320 grit sandpaper, and I wet sand both faces of the material. And I make sure that I thoroughly sand the whole surface of the material. I just wrap the sandpaper around a little chunk of neoprene rubber. And I find that really works well to apply an even force without digging in or gouging too much. And then it's resting on a neoprene pad that's on top of a piece of plexiglass.
And what kind of grit are you running there?
220 or 320, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay. Well, I like those little, look like kind of slide catalogs or something. You've got your metal.
Yeah, those are little racks that I put together to hold the sheets so that they're not touching each other. And then once I get it cleaned, I put it in a tub of water that has a pinch of citric acid in it. And the citric acid keeps the metal from oxidizing while it's sitting there in the water. If I didn't have that in there, that copper would start turning color within a few minutes. And I mean literally just a pinch, you know, in that 16-ounce container, you know, it's like just the tiniest little bit is all that's necessary. And so once all the sheets are cleaned, I dry them off. In my shop, I'm using a really clean jet of compressed air. I've got a couple of filters sitting on the particular line I use to blow them off with, and you know, regular, you know, kind of coalescing filter, and then a what they call a toilet paper filter. It looks like a roll of toilet paper stuck in the filter canister, and it catches all the particulates and oils and anything that would be in the airline and keeps you from making the work you've just cleaned dirty again. And then after everything is cleaned up and dried, I stack it, and I use this fixture. This idea originally came from a guy named Marvin Jensen, who was at Carbondale, working with a bunch of the early Mokume folks, and he called it a torque plate. And it's basically a couple of sheets of steel that are drilled for some bolts, or in this case, some studs. Everything's clamped in between here, and I use a hydraulic press to compact the whole stack, and then while it's under tension, I tighten the bolts.
Billy's asking, you know, why we had just covered it there. It looked like you were just using tap water to wash that stuff. Is there any need to be using distilled water, or is this tap water fine?
Yeah, I think it's all going to depend on what your water source is. I live out in the county, and I'm on a well, and my water is pretty clean as far as It doesn't have a lot of things like chlorine in it that are active. So the only thing that's going to be in there is like, you know, some minerals that aren't really going to affect the process. I will say that I rinse everything after I've done all the scrubbing. I take everything out of that tub and I rinse it in bottled water, not distilled water, just, you know, it's what are the reverse osmosis purified water. So nothing terribly fancy, but I do rinse it in a clean water before drying it.
And the fixture that you put together that holds all the layers between it. Joe Elliott's asking, were those stainless or just regular mild steel?
This is just mild steel. You'll see later on today when I go to do the forging, the initial forging on this, when I pull it out of the furnace, these plates are a one-time use. They're going to be destroyed in the process. The plates that I use every day for my laminations of especially the precious metals, gold and stuff like that, are very high tech. It's Inconel 718 and backed with a couple of big blocks of A286, which is a high temperature stainless. And I'm using Inconel 718 bolts. But that ends up with a much larger fixture than can go in this kiln. This kiln is still kind of a prototype version, so it's not as big as some of the ones, the unit that I use kind of on a normal everyday basis. So I'm using this smaller set of plates for this. You know, the mild steel works just fine, but it is a one-time use only. And the bolts are a grade 8. You want something that you can put a fair amount of torque on when you tighten everything down. One of the most important things in getting a good bond is having all of the layers in intimate contact with each other while they're being heated up. So that's why I'm using the hydraulic press. And on this stack, I took it up to 30 tons before I tightened the bolts down. So a lot of force to try and keep everything in intimate contact as it's heating up. It does two things for you. One, the atoms can't jump huge gaps. The surfaces have to be touching each other for the atoms to be able to bond from one side to the other. And the other thing it does is it really limits how easily it is for oxygen to get in between the sheets during the heating process.
So speaking of that fixture, are you adding any resists to the plates to keep them from bonding to that steel?
I'm not sure if you can see that layer of white material that's on the face of the fixture.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but we'll take.
Yeah, it's a little hard to see. It's called boron nitride, and it's basically an inert ceramic type material that is available as a paste, and you can dilute it with water and just paint it on. And if you're feeling really spendy, you can buy an aerosol can of it for about 40 bucks that sprays a very nice thin coating on. And it does two things for you in this process. One, it keeps you from bonding the copper to the steel, and it will bond to the steel, no question about it. If you forget to put a release agent between the steel and the copper, you will make a very nice laminate of the steel and the copper as well. The other thing that it does for you is it's a high temperature lubricant. One of the places it's used is in the hot steel die striking or hot die striking work. And it's used to coat the surfaces of the dies during hot forging for die striking work. So it's a really nice lubricant at high temperatures, much higher than graphite or molybdenum disulfide will work at. It's good to, you know, like I think it's like 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit in air, and close to 5,000 in a inert or vacuum environment.
Could you tell us what that is one more time?
It's called boron nitride. You can buy it from McMaster Carr and buy it in like a 1 pound container. The problem is they no longer list it in their catalog, even though they still carry it. Don't ask me why they don't list it in the catalog, but I've been buying it from them for 25 years, and I'll get the catalog number for you, and you can order it from them. And it's like $25 or $30 for a 1 pound container, and that'll last a long time. It's readily available. It's used as a resist. Some people use it to prevent brazing from running around all over a piece. You can paint it to act as kind of a stop to keep brazing liquid from flowing during soldering operations. It's very useful. It also is really nice anti-seize on bolts. If you're putting something into a high temperature environment and it's bolted together, if you paint it on the threads, it makes it much easier to bring it apart.
And Peter's asked, I think you did answer this, it is water soluble?
Yeah, well, it's not water soluble, but it's in a water dispersion. It's mixed with a very tiny amount of kale and clay to give it a little bit of adhesion, because by itself, it's pretty damn near inert. So it doesn't dissolve, it's just carried in suspension in water.
And Joe Elliott's chiming in, you know, the poor man's solution, whiteout and liquid paper seems to work pretty good too.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things you can use. Whiteout is titanium dioxide in a binder. Works great. If you happen to be in the ceramics department, and you can raid them for yellow ochre, which is iron oxide, yellow iron oxide that they use in glazes. So yeah, there's a lot of different solutions you can use to act as a release. I even just used a sheet of paper, which works pretty well, although you can have some minor sticking through the paper. All right, I'm gonna switch back over to the remote camera here. We're just about ready. I want to show you what's going on with the kiln right now. So we're up to about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, little above. So this is copper, brass, bronze. I want to fire it at right around 1,500. So I'm gonna start turning it down now that we've got it up to temperature. And you can see it's nice and toasty warm inside of there.
Are you running any kind of like carbon monoxide detectors or anything in your shop to make sure?
That is a really good thing to be doing, because this thing is designed to be very strong reducing environment. So that means there's going to be a lot of carbon monoxide. And as a matter of fact, let me turn on the overhead exhaust here. And yes, I have a carbon monoxide detector, but it's in the other end of the shop at this point.
Well, as long as you got a good source of fresh air coming at you. You'll
Oh
probably...
yeah. Yeah, I've always got fans running in the shop, exhaust fans. But I've got a couple of point exhaust fans like this one that I just turned on for this area. And hopefully that's not creating too much noise in the background there.
Nope, we can't even hear it.
Great.
Okay, so you said you're shooting for about 1,500 degrees in here.
Right.
are you like, what is that temperature range that this is going to work at, from like low end to high end? Like
Okay.
what's the window?
It all depends on what materials you're working with. If you're working with like copper, brass, bronze, our lowest melting material is going to be that yellow brass, and it's about 1660 Fahrenheit that it melts. So we definitely don't want to get up to 1600 degrees. You don't want to get too hot. But you do want it to be, you know, like 100 degrees in this case is a nice buffer. So, you know, as hot as 1550, 1560. And if you're talking about anything that has significant amounts of silver and copper in it, like trying to do a silver copper laminate or silver gold, anything like that, you're really limited. There's a magic number, which is 1435 Fahrenheit, and that's the eutectic alloy melting point for silver and copper. And because of the really long heat soak that you're doing, if there's enough silver and copper there, you're going to end up with forming some eutectic, and it's going to start to melt. So you've got to stay below 1435 Fahrenheit. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a molten mass.
But that doesn't happen until you've introduced silver into it, correct?
Right, right. But say when I've been doing like copper iron laminates, copper steel laminates, you know, I'll go up to 1750, 1800, because, you know, the only thing you're really worried about there is the melting the copper, which is a little over 2000 Fahrenheit.
So Joe Elliott's wondering if you're going to be republishing your book.
So the book that I contributed to was actually Steve Midget's production, and he decided that he wasn't going to republish it as a paper item, but he is publishing it on his website, a chapter at a time, with theoretically all of it being published at some point. And that's Mokume.com. So if you want to go take a look at his website, you can find a link to his book. I'm not theoretically under contract. I am under contract to write a book about Mokume, but I am woefully behind on it. So at some point, I will have a book about it, but under my own name. But I'm not sure when that's going to be done.
Well, we all hope you find time, because we'd love to read it. So I've got a question about, you know, you were up to about 1500 degrees or just over before you put this billet in. And right. I'm wondering, you know, what are you at temperature wise now in there? I'm assuming it kind of crashed.
It dropped way down. We're at 1294 right now. It's climbing, but it'll take a little while. As you can see, the metals are still considerably darker than the kiln. So they're pretty cool. It's probably going to take a good half hour to get it up to temperature. But the idea behind this kiln, I'd like to talk about a bit. So this started out, at this point, I think I've used just about every method that can possibly be used to laminate Mokume. I've done it I started out doing it in an electric kiln in charcoal. So I had a container with the billet inside of it that had charcoal in it. And that was my first successful method for laminating it. This is back in like 1983. And I was living in a mobile home park, and everything I'd read about making mokume at the time, people were using coal or charcoal forge to do the lamination. And this is pretty much the only people who were really doing much with it at that point were the folks at Carbondale and another group of students at University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. Gene and Hiroko Pijanowski had brought in information back from Japan about how it was done. And they taught a series of workshops, and Brent Kington's students either arrived at it separately or picked it up through those workshops. I'm not really sure. If Philip Baldwin's in the audience, maybe he can chime in about how that happened, because I think he was there at the time. That was really the only place in the country where mokume was going on in the United States. And there probably wasn't more than 5 people in Japan doing it at that time. So it wasn't like something that you could easily go and learn about. There was no YouTube, no internet. So everything that I relied on was basically papers written by the students at Carbondale and University of Michigan. And my living situation was such that I couldn't set up a coal forge in my backyard. And so I started messing around trying to get it to bond in an electric kiln. And I was successful eventually in getting it to work inside the electric kiln using the charcoal wrapped environment. And so that's kind of what got me going with it. Since then, I've used gas furnaces, I've used handheld torches, I built a whole traditional Japanese forge called the Hodo. And I've fired it using charcoal in a Japanese forge with a Japanese bellows, and that was a lot of fun. But one of my main method up till now has really always been using electricity. And it works pretty well, but it's slow. When you talk about wrapping up this billet and putting it inside of a container filled with charcoal, the heating time to get the whole thing up to temperature can be several hours to be sure that you're actually where you want to be temperature-wise. And it kind of, I don't know, it just feels like it's a little bit removed from actually, watching what's going on. It's all behind, wraps. You can't see anything. So you're just kind of hoping that everything's going right inside of the billet. And it just kind of feels a step removed. Running a successful operation to do it in a coal forge takes a little bit of time and skill to learn how to do that. And I still really am not, I'm not set up here to do coal or charcoal in my studio. And I find gas furnaces to be pretty unsatisfactory for this. It's just really easy to melt things. It's very hard to get control. So the whole idea behind this was to allow me to have much better control over what's going on with the billet in the kiln and get a higher speed in heating the material up. And speaking of that, we're up to about 1400 degrees according to the thermocouple, and as you can see, it's all getting a pretty uniform color in there right now. You can also see that everything's still pretty nice and shiny as far as the edges of those billets or the sheets. And that's because we've got so much excess propane in there. It's keeping it very nicely reducing.
James, do you use any flux in this operation?
No, I don't. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that if you're going to apply the flux, you've got to put it on when everything's cold. Or you don't have to, but that would be the normal process. You know, you try and paint it on, and you're going to wick water in between the sheets, carrying whatever amount of flux along with it. So it ends up kind of inhibiting the contact of the metal sheets with each other. And if things are not kept really tightly clamped together, it can cause complete failure of a bond, even though you're trying to help the bond.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here.
Sure.
One of them, I think you kind of touched on, saying that, you know, you don't have a coal forge or a charcoal forge running there, but Peter Rich is asking, you know, how would you go about controlling the temperature of this in a charcoal forge?
Well, the biggest thing, of course, is learning how to control your fire, controlling the amount of air going in. You have to really keep an eagle eye on it, because that forge is very hot compared to, you know, your desired temperatures. So my experience so far has been, I really enjoy the Japanese box bellows as a means of controlling the air. I think you get a lot of delicacy of control with it. But I still find you really need an eagle eye with the solid fuel. But you're going to build, I'll try and find the link, but on Hiroko P. Janowski's webpage, there's a movie that they made back in the early 80s that shows them doing a coal-fired, or actually I think they're using coke for this particular firing. And I think it's a really good video showing how to do it. And either somebody can find it while we're talking, or I'll shoot a link over to Kiln and he can put it out for everybody.
Yeah, and if we're going to share something like that, social media is a pretty good spot for it. I know not everybody hits it, but okay, so Benjamin Williams is asking if you think maybe a ribbon burner would create a better even heat in there.
You know, a ribbon burner might. The biggest problem I'm having right now is I've got this burner turned down. It's almost shut off. My biggest problem so far is to try and have a large enough flame to try and keep the amount of oxygen in the furnace down, but not overheat what's going on. I literally, my burner is sitting right at the point of shutting off. I'm gonna take the camera here and just try and show you what the burner area is looking like right now. There's just almost nothing coming out of that burner. Yeah. Most of the flame is that side jet of propane that's just pure propane. You know, I could run it off of a very small torch as far as the temperature. The problem is that I wouldn't have enough flame in there, wouldn't have enough fuel to keep the oxide level down. Yeah. Well, I don't know what just happened with my camera, but it just decided to kind of lose contrast there. Maybe we've just gotten to the point of saying this is enough. All right. Stop sharing that.
What are you at temperature wise?
We're at 1468.
Oh, coming up on it.
Yeah, and I've got yeah, can't really see very well. Flames don't show up well on these cameras,
No.
but all of the holes, the exhaust holes and the peephole and everything, all have kind of blue-yellow flame coming out of them. So I know I've got, you know, still a strongly reducing environment, which is my goal here.
Yeah. So this billet that you made, it looks like all the pieces they were about 2 inches square, somewhere in that range to start with.
1.5 for the starting size. So mostly 18 gauge sheet. Well, it's 18 gauge for the copper and the bronze, and the brass is about half that thickness. So about 20 gauge.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 24 gauge. Yeah, go ahead.
About how big are the billets that you run in your, you know, you said that these are small billets compared to what you're normally making. What size would they usually run?
Well, normally when I'm doing copper brass type billets, I'm doing like 2 inch by 3 inch by maybe a 2 inch thick billet. When I'm doing precious metals, a lot smaller than that, like 5/8 by 1.25 by 5/8. And at today's precious metals prices, that's a $3,000 to $4,000 billet.
So this is personal curiosity, because we did have a demo a while ago about recycling precious metals. And so when you, if you're doing a precious metal one and you get it done and it's a mix of gold and silver, let's say, how are you going about, you know, reclaiming that metal? Are you sending it off somewhere, or are you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you're going to do precious metal Mokume, you need to develop a really good relationship with your refiner. For every ounce of metal that I bring in, I send about 0.7 of an ounce back to my refiner by the time everything is said and done.
Yeah, you got to have a really good relationship with them. Joe's asking if you've ever done a forge with a specific atmosphere, like injected with argon.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've done billets. I did a whole series of experiments where I built a can around the billet and tried doing it in vacuum, doing it with argon flowing through it, doing it with argon with 4% hydrogen flowing through it. And my experimental results were, it didn't make that much difference between firing it that way and firing it either using charcoal or, in this case, using the strongly reducing environment of the gas forge that I'm set up.
You know, if someone was going to try to start playing with this themselves, what is really a good mixture of metals for the beginner to kind of start with? Like, what's a high success rate, maybe?
Copper and brass is what I normally teach students with. Get a strong color contrast both in the raw and in patinaed form. Brass is a little bit finicky in the laminating, but it's still probably the most straightforward material combination. This bronze I'm using is actually technically a brass. It's called commercial bronze, but it's just a very low zinc brass. And it provides kind of a nice intermediate color contrast against the copper and the brass. The nickel, nickel silver, things like that provide a much stronger color contrast, but they can be fairly hot short. You have to watch out when you're forging it. So I'm using pure copper, which is a C101 or a C110 copper, C260 brass, and C220 for the bronze.
Charlie's asking if you've ever used aluminum bronze.
No, I have not. One of the issues you run into with materials is, at this point, I think I could bond just about any two metals to each other. The question is really more about whether or not I can work it once they're bonded. And aluminum bronze is such tough stuff that it would be really difficult to do much with as far as working it against another material. It'd probably tear itself apart as you're trying to work it.
And then Joe's asking, I'm just going to kind of read this. Hopefully it makes sense. In copper silver Mokume, is the degrading of silver become a problem? I'm not sure if he's talking about the galvanizing effect or.
Yeah, I'm not really sure exactly what he's asking there.
Yeah. Joe, would you like to elaborate your question, please? I think he's talking about the galvanizing effect, like when you're wearing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime that you put two metals together, you end up with a galvanic cell. And if you're not careful, you can end up with galvanic corrosion occurring. So for most things of a decorative nature, it's not really a problem. It becomes a problem, however, on things like rings, because rings are constantly getting wet, and between the sweat, the salt crystals on your skin from the sweat and the water that it's exposed to daily, you end up with basically you end up with a corrosion process going on, and the copper goes away. And there's not really anything you can do to prevent that other than not use a base metal against a noble metal. And noble metals are like silver, gold, platinum, palladium, all the platinum group metals. You can also avoid the problem if you have a passivated or a self-passivating metal, like if you can say bond stainless steel to silver, you won't have a corrosion problem, even though normally the steel would have an issue with the silver. The chrome oxide that forms creates a passive layer that prevents the material from being corroded. For reference, we're sitting right now and have been for the past probably 10 minutes at 1518 degrees, 1520, which is kind of just right about in the sweet spot for this material.
And so then how long do you let it soak at that temperature for?
Basically 10, 15 minutes is enough if everything is right. And by everything is right, I mean, you know, you've got a good compression on the stack, and you haven't had any other issues. This is, you know, I'm getting to the point where I'm just about ready to consider taking this out and taking it over to the press over here and giving it a good squeeze.
Peter Clark's asking, what alloy of nickel silver do you use?
752.
752. In the downtime between things here, we'd love to just hear, tips and tricks on pattern development.
Okay. So I've got some opinions about number of layers and patterns. I am of the opinion that billets that are much more than about 35 layers, maybe 40 tops, are a waste of time, because you really develop such a finely grained pattern that you can't really see what's going on with it unless you're up very close to it. I find that I want to cut through at least 3 or 4 layers during the patterning process so that I can get, a couple of different layers of the material exposed. If you start cutting through too many, again, you start losing the impact of the pattern because you've got too much going on in there. I like to use a rotary carbide burr to do the carving, and I like to use a very high-speed pneumatic tool to do that. I'm going to see if I can get the camera up one more time here, my remote camera, because I'd like you all to see what's going on with the flame coming out of the material right now. See if I can grab this. There we go. So I basically at this point have the burner almost completely shut down. And you can see that, I'm not getting any blue flame at all coming out of the kiln. So there's just virtually no oxygen going into it. And this is kind of like where I want to be once I hit the temperature I'm trying to work at. So in all that kind of fiddling around there, I let the temperature drop a little bit, but it's about 1480 right now. And you can see over here on the burner port, it's just, just mostly the propane going in there and a little bit of ambient air that's burning.
Joe's asking, your press dies, are they covering the entire compression plate minus the bolt heads, or is it a?
No. Let's see if I can. Now, I'll show you a close-up of them when we get once I get things going. But no, they're fitting in between the excuse me, in between the bolt heads. And this, just to go back and touch on the safety thing again, at this point, it really smells like only partially combusted propane in here. So if you're going to try this kiln, you really want to have good ventilation going. Make sure you're getting plenty of fresh air coming in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move my camera out of the way, switch the laptop over so it's facing the press, and I'm going to shut off the forge All right. So you can see it's squished out a little bit. The plates have been marked by the dies, but it's holding the thermal mass pretty well. I'm going to grab my electric nut driver here.
And I think the marks it left behind with the dies were a pretty good indicator of that shape. You just got a round sort of top and bottom fit between the nuts.
All right, well, I've managed to wedge that in there between the bolts. So I'm going to go off screen here for a moment and knock those out.
About how much compression do you think you got?
I probably got 25%, which is kind of in the ballpark for what I'm normally shooting for, is somewhere around 20 to 25% compression from any given single stage.
So for that billet, we're looking at 3/8 of an inch or something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around 1/4 or 3/8.
Hey, good catch.
Yeah, I planned that, right?
Yeah, like a pro. Shed the shell, catch the billet. Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we're nothing but professionals here. All right, so you can see even with all the time, see if I can maybe get even more light here. Not too badly oxidized considering how much time it spent in the furnace.
Yeah.
So at this point, the next step is going to be to heat it back up and give it another go in the press. Probably try and get it down to 50% of its original starting thickness by hot forging. And then I'm going to clean up all the edges, take it back to nice smooth metal so that I don't have any of that serration from the misstacking and everything that goes on in the initial lamination. And at that, depending on where I want to go with it at that point, I'm going to either start cold rolling it, or I may do some more hot forging. I don't know. You guys can see I've got a little 25-pound little giant here that does a really nice job on drawing out the sheet for getting it down to patterning thickness pretty quickly. And so it just kind of all depends on where, you know, what exactly I'm going to be making as to where I would go with this. But I'm not going to try and do really anything too stressful with it until I've got it reduced by maybe 75% of its original starting thickness. And by that time, it's going to be pretty much acting like just a single block of metal. And I don't have to baby it quite as much.
The next round of kind of compressing that you do that under the press?
Yeah.
And do you change the dies out at all, or are you just?
Yeah. So in the initial forging, hot forging, I try and make sure that the dies I'm using cover the whole face of the billet. And so I can change out dies in this press here. For the copper and brass, I can work it fairly hot, and the 30-ton press works okay. For metals that I can't work quite so hot, like silver, copper, or the other precious metals, I've got a 50-ton and a 150-ton press that I'll use depending on size of the billet and a few other factors. But again, I'm always trying to shoot for that fairly significant reduction before doing anything too stressful on the billet.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen some of, pattern development can come from doing things like, twisting the bar. It seems like that's a fairly stressful operation. You want to make sure all your lamination's really good and strong before you jump into something like that. Yeah,
I do all of my twisting cold on the non-ferrous metals. And the reason I do is because it's so hard to keep them hot evenly while you're doing the twisting. If you're talking about 1.5 inch diameter bar of Damascus steel, it holds its heat fairly well while you're doing a twisting operation. So, you can put it in the forge, heat it up, and then, give it a couple of good turns and then put it back in the forge. When you're talking about a 1/4 inch or a 3/8 inch diameter piece of copper brass or copper silver, it loses heat so quickly that you can't get it twisted very well in time hot. And if you're sitting there trying to balance a torch and the twisting apparatus, your vise, whatever you're using to hold everything, it just gets to be too much of a crazy dance. And what I found happened is it's just way too easy to overheat the material and break it. I think my experience at this point with Mokume is that the failures in Mokume are not so much about a bad lamination. They're about not understanding how to treat it after it's laminated. So you break the bond rather than having a bad bond from the beginning. That's not to say that you can't have a bad bond from the beginning, but you get everything clamped up nice and tight, you keep the oxygen away from it, you get it hot, it's gonna bond. So it's more about how you treat it once it's bonded as to whether or not it's gonna stay together.
Are you gonna be, or we get to watch you take another squish or two on this, or what do you think?
Well, we certainly can do that. All right, so what I will do is I'm gonna go ahead and fire the furnace back up and use that as my heat source and change out the dies in the press, and we'll take a second shot at pressing this.
Cool. Well, maybe while it's heating up, we can really take a better look at your whole torch setup that's feeding.
Yeah. So this torch is basically designed off of Mike Porter's torches that he put together, that really nice book on making propane torches. This is a piece of 3/4 inch diameter stainless tubing with a 7/8 piece of tubing sliding to give me the air valve. There's a little 16/1000 of an inch orifice in the end of this piece of brass.
So did you make this whole setup yourself, or is
Yeah.
this something you can buy?
No, I made it. Let's see. Yeah, I can't really see in there very well, and it's hot. So I've got a little diffuser in the very front of the torch. It's got a tapered sleeve, and then there's a diffuser inside of the throat of it to split the flame up a little bit. And to try and get that really fine control, this is a 10-turn needle valve. So as you turn it out, it gives you very fine control over the amount of gas that's flowing in. The shutter allows you to control the air. And then I've got a T connector coming off here, going up again to a little needle valve, and then just a straight pipe that's bringing the raw propane in for the added reduction.
I was asking what you refer to the bond of these metals as is like a technical term. Is it, you know, a weld? Is it diffusion, a mechanical joint? What's the?
This is the process is called solid state diffusion bonding. And technically it's a weld. So you could also call it solid state welding, but that's the solid state part is we never take it to the point of the metals melting. It is a diffusion bond, but frankly, any kind of a joint other than gluing things together involves diffusion as a part of the process, whether you're soldering, welding, or doing solid state bonding.
For those of us who don't have a thermocoupler, any tips or tricks on when, if you were trying to do this out of, you know, a home forge, on how to identify these temperatures by sight, like if you're watching the film?
Good luck. That's the whole, that's probably the most critical, or the second most critical part of this concept here, is to have the thermocouple to allow you to see what the temperature is. You know, you can get one of these digital thermocouples, meters, and the thermocouple itself for less than $100. And if you're going to be doing Mokume, I'd say it's almost a necessity to have an ability to read the temperature of the furnace, whether it's an electric kiln, gas furnace, whatever. Otherwise, you're going to melt a lot of stuff, because it's not, I don't think it's possible. I shouldn't say that. It's not easy to judge the temperature correctly without a lot of experience. You know, obviously the Japanese guys who were doing this in the 1700s didn't have thermocouples, but they also had a lot of patience, and a lot of skill in managing the fire and in reading the temperature of what the metal was doing. And I don't think there's any good way for me to try and describe it to you other than, you know, you just need to try it and figure out where it melted and not go that hot again.
Yeah, and to just invest in a thermocouple and you make use of the technology we have.
Yeah.
To go back to, you know, what that bond is referred to, Joe threw out there kind of an interlocking crystal growth. Is that another?
Okay, so what's happening? I'm going to change these dyes out while we're talking here. We're trying to encourage the atoms that are on the two sheets of metal to, oh, that's annoyingly, I don't know if you can hear that whistling, but the burner is making a really annoying whistling sound. So we're trying to encourage the atoms that make up the crystals on the two sheets of metal to basically jump across that interface and form new crystals. So all of the metals that I'm working with here are all face-centered cubic crystals. And we're trying to get an atom of copper to jump across and join up with a crystal that has maybe an atom of zinc and an atom of copper in it. And so in order to allow them to do that, it's got to be really clean. It's got to be really close together, and it's got to be hot. Because by heating it up, you know, all the atoms are constantly in motion. They're constantly vibrating. The hotter you get it, the more they vibrate, the greater the amplitude of vibration is of the atoms. This is why metals expand when you heat them, because the movement of the atoms becomes greater as it gets hotter. So you get it hot enough and an atom can break loose of a crystal and jump to a neighboring crystal to form a new crystal. So that's what we're trying to do, is get it close enough, clean enough, and hot enough so that the atoms can jump across that boundary and start building new crystals along that interface between the two sheets.
To make an analogy here, sort of like Velcro almost, right? Where it's
almost, you know, one of the better kind of analogies to me anyway, was thinking about these crystals as kind of like a bunch of ball bearings that are sitting on the ends of springs. And the springs all go to other ball bearings. So you kind of create this array of springs and ball bearings. And the ball bearings are moving, constantly moving back and forth. And if they get moving fast enough, they can break free of that spring, but they're then captured by another spring. It's anyhow, it's one of those things that's hard to really grasp. So we have to rely on these analogies to talk about them.
So as you're coming up to this second heat for working this billet down, do you shoot for a similar temperature, that 1500?
Yeah, I'm going for a similar temperature, but I'm not as concerned about the lack of oxygen in there now, because I've got my bond. So I'm happy with the fact that that bond is sealed up all the layers. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm back up to heat in the furnace. And now I'll get the billet heated up to temperature, and then we'll give it another good press.
Well, if somebody was looking to contact you because they wanted some of your work, or if they were looking to buy, because you also sell just already developed patterned sheet Mokume, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do anything from a basic, stick it together and then you do all the forge work down to pattern sheet. So I was very lucky to be early on in the whole internet thing, and I got the URL mokume-gane.com. So if anybody's interested in contacting me or looking at my website, that's mokume-gane.com. And I'm available through that website if you want to get a hold of me and ask about buying Mokume or just have some questions about it.
Well, we're lucky as a community to have you.
We're getting up to temperature. The billet's not quite up there yet. The furnace is back up to temperature, but the billet's still a little bit cold. So are there any other questions that can answer right now?
Well, I mean, I just got a question about your furnace. I know you said that you were looking towards making designs for sale, get the plans, maybe buy a kit. Where are you at on that process?
Well, my plan is to publish it as a PDF document to show how to make the kiln. I really am not all that crazy about trying to be an equipment retailer, but I am going to publish the designs for the kiln, and I'm probably going to put together a couple of videos for YouTube to show some of the construction aspects. The one that I'm showing you today is all made from commercial product called Unistrut. That's a real easy kind of tinker toy way to build things. The idea behind this one was that it wouldn't take, that somebody could make it with a hacksaw and a drill, a hand drill. I have since decided it's got way too many parts. It's got like almost 80 fasteners in it. And it's just a little crazy. So my most recent version of the furnace, I just got the pieces back from the laser cutter. So it'll have a front and a back plate like this, and only a couple of short pieces of Unistrut holding the whole thing together. And a much smaller number of parts, and hopefully a lot easier to put together and build. And so I'll offer the DXF files to have the laser cutting done. And the vendor I'm using for the laser cutting, I think will even allow me to publish a URL that somebody could just go and order the parts from them.
Are all the bricks you're using in that, are they like a high temp soft brick?
This is all K26 soft brick, which is also really easy to work. You can carve it with just about anything. All right, so the billet's up to temperature. I'm going to swing the screen around on the press, and I'll pull it out. And we'll give it another squish here. All right, so there we are at this point. This is looking pretty good. I don't really know if you can see, there's a little bit of cracking and separation on the edges of the material. See if I can point that out here.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can see it. Those, yeah, the little lines that are forming on the edges. Is that common? Or
Yeah, that's a normal kind of defect that you'll see in some, particularly in the brass and nickel silver. It'll do that out on the edge, and that's not normally an issue for the billet. That's all going to be cleaned up when I cut the edges back on it. So if you see that, don't think you've screwed your billet up or something. That's a pretty normal thing to see on the edges of the billet. You know, it's what they call it barreling. You're pressing down with the top and bottom dies on the press. The metal's getting cool where it's in contact with the dies, but the metal in the middle is still quite warm, so it tends to push out and extrude more than the metal that's up near the top and bottom. And that stress, that hoop stress around the perimeter is quite high, and the edges of the material just start to crack.
And so Don's got a question, the same question I had. So how do you go about cutting these edges back? What's your process?
On copper and brass, I'll show you in a moment, but I have a milling machine, and I'll just cut the edges back on the milling machine normally. On precious metals, I've got a box set up with a high-speed pneumatic cutter in it, and I kind of freehand. So it's like a rotary file, and I freehand the edges back with that. But I got to keep all the sawdust from the precious metals contained, because otherwise lose a hell of a lot of money.
For somebody who doesn't have a milling machine, is this something you could use, like a portaband or a chop saw, or?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards the portaband. It's what I used to use early on, was portaband. Ideally, if you have a horizontal bandsaw, that would be preferred, in that I would set it up so that rather than cutting across the edges of the laminate, I would cut down through the face of the laminate. Hopefully I'm making some kind of sense there.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're using a horizontal, would you lay it down and cut through, or would you?
Yeah, so if I was wanting to trim this edge off here, I would want to come down on this face.
Okay.
And cut this way, just because it puts less peeling. If I cut across in this axis, sometimes it'll want to peel the top layers on the back side of the cut.
Mm-hmm. And do you wait to do that cutting until you've gotten it down to that 50% thickness?
This is about the point that I would do that cutting. So I'm pretty close to 50% reduction on this billet right now.
And then Peter's asking if you approach the milling kind of the same way.
Yes. So on the milling, I would have the cutter running along this edge back and forth like this,
Mhm.
and not across the face, but along the face.
That makes a lot of sense. At what point do you feel comfortable like cooling that off, sticking it in a bucket of water or something?
I really hate to quench Mokume. Um, I've always felt like it puts a lot of stress on it. Once I get it down to where it's like sheet, where I'm in the 75 to 80% reduction, then I feel okay about quenching it. Otherwise, I tend to let it air cool if I can. So this is kind of my hot shop area where we've just been sitting while I did that laminate. Got a couple of gas forges here. Got a KA75 air hammer and my wonderful little giant 25 that Jorgen Harl did a wonderful job of hot rodding for me.
That Jorgen, man, he's something else. I
He
just got
is.
the last few weeks with him, and that guy's got a good brain on his shoulders.
He does. He does. So the place is kind of a mess, but take you on a quick walk through. This is a Haas TL1 CNC lathe. I do a lot of tool making for various aspects of making the jewelry, and I use this lathe quite a bit in making fixtures and tooling for making the rings. And over here is the Bridgeport milling machine. Use this for just a whole bunch of different stuff. Again, a lot of fixtures and stuff, making torque plates and assemblies for bolting and clamping the Mokume during the manufacturing process. I must admit right off the bat that I am a tool addict. My name is Jim, and I've never seen a tool that I didn't want to utilize. So there are a lot of them here. Horizontal bandsaw, variety of casting and jewelry tumbling and finishing equipment. This is a box for blasting the investment off of castings. Got a pressure washer that shoots water down through that nozzle and allows you to blow all the investment off of the casting. This is my most kind of mad scientist thing in the shop. This is called the glove box, and see if I can get the whole thing in the image here. This is a chamber that is filled with argon, and it has a bunch of glove ports, which are these things here. And right now it's got a vacuum on it because I'm changing out the atmosphere, so I can't open it up and show you the gloves. But there are these long gloves in there, and not quite sure if you can see through the reflections and everything, but there's a TIG torch hanging up in there. And I use that TIG torch to melt and alloy metals and do welding. This is an airlock that allows you to move stuff in and out of the glove box. There are two doors on it, so you can put stuff in, close it up, pull a vacuum, backfill with argon, open it up on the inside, and bring stuff in and out. So can do a lot of crazy things like weld titanium.
I do welding and or melting and casting of stainless steel, tool steel, all on a very small scale inside here.
Well, that is really cool. Thank you for sharing that contraption.
This is my 50-ton hydraulic press. And that's the 150-ton.
Charlie's asking, what kind of feed through do you use to put the TIG into the glove box?
It's all pretty crazy stuff. That's the feed through for the TIG torch into the glove box. That's a piece of Teflon. This is a hollow rod that the coolant water goes in through here. It's a hollow brass rod that goes through and into the chamber. You can see the leads coming in down there. So it's just a whole bunch of O-ring seals and Teflon to metal seals that provide the isolation between the outside and the inside. So this is, overall, this building is what we call the shop, to try and differentiate. This is where all the big, dirty, nasty, noisy, smoky stuff goes on. And then next door, all right. Yeah, the two buildings each have their own wireless router, so probably dropped out when I walked across. So this is the jewelry studio. Lots of machines and stuff to make small, shiny, pretty stuff.
Yeah, you got a lot of rolling mills in there.
Yeah, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I think I have enough. Well, actually, I don't. I need a bigger one.
You can never have enough.
Yeah, yeah. The dog kennel, my bench jeweler has a dog that he brings in to work with him, and that's his bench. A bunch of little bitty machine tools to machine jewelry. This is actually a pretty nice setup for cutting the edges off of Mokume. Somebody was asking about a portaband earlier.
Yeah.
This is a company called Swag, and they make these tables that fit a variety of different portabands, and it turns it into a really nice vertical bandsaw, and I like it a lot.
Do you know offhand what kind of tooth setup you're using for blades for those?
This is it's a variable pitch. I think it's 14 to 18 tooth. You know, basically it's the same kind of thing. You'd really go for any any bandsaw. You're going to kind of want to look at how thick it is, and I tend to use a little finer tooth setting than you know, the maximum allowable, just so I don't tear things apart quite as easily.
Do you use any lubricants when you're cutting that stuff?
Yeah, when I'm doing the cutting of the Mokume in here, I use this stick lubricant. It's a waxy kind of thing, just kind of push it into the blade, and so it's kind of a solid that melts as it starts to cut. This area where I do all the polishing, cleaning of the work. And 3D printer, little micro TIG setup, and my computer area. And this is that box I was talking about for cutting the precious metal. So,
you save it all.
yep, absolutely. And that's the grinder that I use to do the cutting. And you can see that rotary file there on the tool.
Oh, well, James, I just want to thank you so much for bringing us into your shop and sharing all this useful info with us. I, for one, feel like I learned a bunch today. And your generosity with your time and donating that billet. Thank you. And we're getting, folks in the audience saying the same thing. It's been wonderful, awesome demo. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you all for asking me. I had fun, if not a little bit of excitement this morning in realizing I was running behind time, but I enjoyed it. And I hope folks got useful stuff out of it.